Yes. I think the thing about losing the election and not having the vote, though, is that, and having the Electoral College in any fashion, is that my vote, if I vote differently from how my state goes, my vote needs to be included with the votes from other states. Mm-hmm. That's the whole thing that makes a difference.
Are you going to ask a question of?
Yeah, so that's why I'm wondering that when you say that just because your candidate loses, you're disenfranchised, that's not what the problem is for people who disagree with that. So I'm wondering how you would address that.
Again, I don't. I'm trying to be. I just that's sort of an election or sort of an argument for the way we feel about how the process works. And I guess that the question was put at the beginning about what value it is that sort of determines how we come down on this. And for me, it's your mode of analysis. I mean, frankly, the founders did not sit down and write a constitution sitting there thinking about what kind of government is going to make the people in these new states feel good about their government. They sat down and created a government that they thought was going to be limited to doing the important things like providing national defense and providing for trade and commerce and all these things. And you can have a different mode of analysis than that. But I can't help but feel that it's very limiting to say we're going to design processes, we're going to have direct election just for a thought experiment. It's a good thought experiment. If I could convince you, I can't, but if I could convince you beyond a shadow of a doubt that if we went to a direct popular election of the president, that the country would become unstable. If I could convince you that bad things would happen, would you change your mind? And I take it that some people would not. They would say the country, the future, prosperity is not what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about how the election works and whether it's mathematically perfect. If that's your mode of analysis, then by all means, you really probably should change the Electoral College. My argument is based on the effects that it produces, not the effects that it produces long term. And that was the founding of the analysis.
I'd like to just speak to that for a second because we were talking about values, and I think, although Trent and I were talking about how much, even with different views we have in common here, I would say that another value would be and a value that I hold is having a system that moves towards one person, one vote. And that it's not just about process or about making people who lost feel, liking government or whatever. I would say, because we've seen this in other countries, that it's really about a much more core value of trust. Trust not only in the process, but in the outcome. And we know from other places in the world what happens when people don't trust their government. I think I said briefly that my colleague Cynthia Horn studies the process of what is called lustration. And this is a process of getting people in post-communist countries like Poland and Romania to really trust that the governments and institutions that are put in place are fair. And these are ongoing processes that have gone on for 20 years or more in these countries. And so I think that we look at that in other places and we understand it, but yet it's harder for some of us to think about that conversation here. And I think that doesn't mean that national popular vote is necessarily the way to move in that direction. But I don't think it's in either this or that in terms of moving towards a system that engenders more trust and at least in terms of my values, moves towards one person, one vote.
Todd, did you want to say
No, I'd
anything
like
to
to keep
that?
it
Okay,
Yeah.
yes.
Sarah, you mentioned about the litigation. And
Yes.
I'd like to know how, Washington is very, very into litigation on elections. We're probably leading in that lately. And what I'd like to know is how would a situation like this make it any better? It seems to me everybody's going to be litigating everyone, and it does make it worse. I mean, we have mail-in votes now. Our franchise is, you're worried about losing your franchise, my God, you're giving it to the post office. You know, I mean, that I think is more dangerous than you know, you can vote for your congressman and maybe have more power by that vote than you do by voting for president. After all, Congress has purse strings. But that's my question, is how do you think that the litigation would get any better with this? I think this is a dream for trial lawyers.
I don't know that it would. I can't say that it would. I mean, I can say that in terms of the most positive way I envision this change, it would happen relatively slowly and over time, so that that some of the problems with it that Trent and others have commented upon and that I agree with would be taken into account, not necessarily through litigation, but possibly through legislative enactment. I mean, there would be other ways that these could be worked out. It's not going to happen overnight, but in terms of saying for sure that this would eliminate litigation, I can't say that it would.
I was just going to say that the stakes are huge under any of these elections, and there's lots of lawyers. There's going to be lots of litigation no matter what. The recount issue that Trent mentioned, I mean, this is maybe the one area where I think the issue of litigation might be affected, but you know, the odds of the scenario you're talking about where you could have all these states where they're very close outcomes, but it doesn't, not close enough to trigger a recount in the states, but then aggregate it out to a really close outcome. I mean, that's mathematically possible, but that, you know, if you look at the history of our elections, the history of national elections, other places, that, you know, the odds of that happening would probably be pretty slim. More likely, it'd be the same situation where you would have close states triggering their regular recount procedures. And we have really good procedures in this state for that. I mean, we were like ahead of the curve in that, but you still have other states where they have their same lousy recount procedures, and we'd be in the same bag, I think.
I just wanted to real quick mention one factual, I think, disagreement that I have with Sarah is that, I mean, she mentioned that she thinks that in the last 20 years we've seen an increase in litigation. I mean, I think if you look at the elections of 1800, 1824, they might not have been litigated the way we think about it. 1860, 1874, where 4 states produced 2 sets, 6 states produced 2 sets of delegates, and Congress had to create a commission to deal with this. I mean, it wasn't litigation necessarily the way we think about it, but you know, as Todd just said, this is a high stakes process. There's always been a lot of contention. I mean, the election of 1800 was one of the reasons why Alexander Hamilton's bar study partner shot him a few years ago. That's litigation for you.
Say
Catherine, and then